Marcus Hale sat in his sleek, modern office, staring out over the city skyline. His company, Hale Real Estate, was one of the most successful in the industry, and his name was recognized by almost everyone in the business world. As the CEO, he had reached heights that most people could only dream of. Yet, despite all the success, Marcus felt a growing unease. Lately, he had been hearing unsettling whispers from his employees, things he couldn't ignore. There were rumors of office tension, whispers of favoritism, and claims that employees were being mistreated. His first instinct was to dismiss them as just that, rumors. But the more he heard, the more uneasy he became. He had built this company from the ground up, but was it possible that the very culture he had helped create was now suffocating those who worked under him? One day, after a particularly disturbing conversation with a senior manager, Marcus realized that he couldn't simply rely on second-hand information anymore. He needed to see the truth for himself. So, he made a bold decision. He would go undercover. The idea seemed strange to him at first. A CEO like Marcus had always been seen as a powerful figure, someone who called the shots and made decisions from a distance. But to understand what was truly happening within the walls of his company, he had to experience it firsthand. He couldn't continue to operate in the dark, relying on filtered information that came to him from higher ups. It was time for him to see what was really happening at the ground level. Marcus spent the next few days preparing for his undercover operation. He knew that it would have to be seamless. If anyone found out who he was, it would ruin everything. So, he arranged for a trusted associate to help him with the details. They created a false identity for him, one that would allow him to blend in with the employees. He would join the team as just another new hire, someone without any special privileges or knowledge of the company's inner workings. He would wear simple clothes, keep his head down, and focus on observing everything. As the days passed, Marcus found himself growing more excited about the idea. His curiosity was growing stronger than ever. What if the rumors were true? What if the company he had worked so hard to build had become a place where employees felt mistreated and unappreciated? Could it be that his vision for a thriving, collaborative workplace had been lost over time? The morning of his first day as an undercover employee, Marcus woke up early. He dressed in plain clothes, nothing too fancy or attention-grabbing. He wanted to blend in, to be just another face in the crowd. As he drove to the office, he couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation building up inside him. What would he discover once he got there? Would he be able to see things from a fresh perspective? When Marcus arrived at the office, he was greeted with the usual bustle of activity. People were rushing to their desks, making calls, and organizing their work. For a moment, everything felt normal. But as he walked through the hallways, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a strange tension in the air, a subtle undercurrent of unease that seemed to run through the office. As the day went on, Marcus began to notice small things that raised questions. He overheard a conversation between two employees near the break room. One of them was complaining about how her manager always took credit for her work, while another was venting about how he had been overlooked for a promotion despite his outstanding performance. The more Marcus listened, the more he realized that there were deeper issues at play. At lunchtime, Marcus sat in the cafeteria, quietly observing the interactions around him. He noticed how some of the senior employees sat together, forming tight-knit groups that excluded others. The younger staff, on the other hand, ate alone or in small, awkward groups, as if they didn't feel fully integrated into the company's culture. There was a visible divide between the leadership and the rest of the employees, and it seemed to affect everyone's morale. The rest of the day passed in much the same way. Marcus continued to keep his head down, listening to conversations and observing how the employees interacted with one another. It was clear that many of them were unhappy. Some seemed to be struggling with their workloads, while others seemed defeated, as though they had long ago given up on the idea of advancing in the company. But the most troubling thing that Marcus noticed was the sense of fear that hung over the office. People were afraid to speak up, to question authority, or to challenge the status quo. By the end of his first day, Marcus felt overwhelmed. He had hoped to find a few small problems, things that could be easily fixed, but what he saw was far worse than he had imagined. The office wasn't just dysfunctional, it was broken. The culture he had once prided himself on had been replaced by a toxic environment where employees were treated like disposable resources rather than valuable team members. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, he couldn't shake the images of his colleagues frustrated, overworked, and disillusioned. He had always believed that his company was different, that it was a place where people could thrive and succeed together. But now, he realized that he had become so disconnected from the day-to-day operations that he hadn't even noticed how much things had changed. The decision to go undercover had been difficult, but Marcus knew it was the right thing to do. He had seen enough in just one day to understand that the company needed drastic change. But what would he do next? How could he fix the damage that had been done? And, most importantly, who would he have to confront to make things right? As Marcus drifted off to sleep, the weight of his decision settled heavily on his chest. Tomorrow would be another day, another opportunity to uncover the truth. But he knew that the journey ahead would be far from easy. In fact, it would likely be one of the most difficult challenges he had ever faced. But he was ready. For the sake of his company, for the sake of his employees, he would uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Marcus was now fully immersed in his undercover role at Hale Real Estate. His first day had been an eye-opener, and he couldn't shake the images of his co-workers' frustrations and discontent. It was as if an invisible weight hung in the air, unspoken tensions and deep-seated unhappiness. He knew that his mission would not be an easy one, but the more he saw, the more determined he became to uncover the truth and fix what had gone wrong. The next day, he arrived at the office early, ready to blend in as just another employee. He kept his head down, avoided eye contact, and tried his best to appear unremarkable. It wasn't easy. After all, Marcus was used to being in the spotlight, to having people recognize him and treat him with respect because of his position as CEO. But now, he was just another face in the crowd, struggling to fit in with his new persona. The challenge was thrilling, but it also felt strange. This wasn't the life he was used to. As he entered the building, Marcus was greeted by the familiar hum of office activity. People were already working, answering calls, rushing to meetings, and trying to meet deadlines. It felt like any other corporate environment, yet there was an underlying tension that Marcus couldn't ignore. He noticed how people would pass each other in the hallway without saying a word, their faces buried in their phones or in their laptops. There was no sense of camaraderie, no smiles or friendly greetings. It was as if the office had become a place of cold, detached professionalism. Marcus' first task that day was to sit in on a team meeting. He had no real responsibility or tasks assigned to him yet, so he observed from the back of the room as the team discussed their current projects. The leader of the meeting, a senior manager named Todd, dominated the conversation. His tone was harsh and commanding as he rattled off deadlines and goals. No one seemed to question him, and most of the employees looked either bored or defeated. One woman, named Sarah, seemed to be particularly quiet, her eyes glued to the table as Todd continued to talk over her. Marcus observed her closely. She was a hard worker, he could tell. She had been nodding along when the team discussed their latest sales numbers, but when Todd mentioned a new project that she had been working on, he didn't even look at her. It was as if her contributions didn't matter. Marcus could feel the sting of her silence, and he wondered how often this sort of thing happened. After the meeting, Marcus decided to approach Sarah. He found her at her desk, hunched over a pile of paperwork. She didn't notice him at first, so he waited until she looked up. When she finally did, he smiled and introduced himself as a new employee, asking if she needed any help with her work. She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge his sincerity, then nodded and explained the task she was working on. As they talked, Marcus learned that Sarah had been with the company for several years. She had started as an intern, worked her way up, and was now a project coordinator. But despite her dedication and hard work, she had been passed over for a promotion multiple times. She shared with Marcus how the senior managers seemed to favor certain employees, giving them opportunities that she was never offered, even though she had been consistently outperforming her colleagues. "I'm not even sure if it's worth it anymore," Sarah admitted, her voice low and tired. "I've been here for so long, but nothing ever changes. I keep pushing, but it feels like I'm just spinning my wheels." Marcus listened intently, his heart sinking as he realized how deep the frustration ran. Sarah wasn't alone in feeling this way. So many others in the office seemed to be stuck in the same cycle of hard work with no recognition, no chance for advancement, and no appreciation for their contributions. How had it gotten to this point? The next few days passed in much the same way. Marcus continued to observe and interact with his co-workers, gradually learning more about the toxic culture that had taken root in the company. He noticed how employees would keep their heads down, never daring to speak out or challenge the authority of their managers. It was as if there was a fear that permeated every corner of the office, a fear of saying the wrong thing, of rocking the boat, or of being seen as a troublemaker. In one meeting, Marcus overheard a conversation between two employees near the coffee machine. One of them was venting about how he had worked overtime for weeks without getting compensated, while the other was complaining about the lack of communication from the leadership team. "It's like they don't even care about us," one of them muttered, shaking his head. "We're just here to get the job done, and when we're no longer useful, they toss us aside." Marcus could hear the bitterness in his voice, and he felt a pang of guilt. This was the company he had built. His vision had been one of teamwork, collaboration, and support. But somewhere along the way, things had gone wrong. People no longer felt like part of something bigger. They felt like cogs in a machine that could be replaced at a moment's notice. One afternoon, Marcus was invited to sit in on a training session for new hires. The trainer, a well-meaning employee named Karen, seemed enthusiastic as she walked the group through the basics of the company's policies and procedures. However, Marcus couldn't help but notice how disengaged the new hires seemed. They were polite but distant, nodding along without showing any real interest in the material being presented. It was as if they had already made up their minds this was just another job, just another paycheck. They weren't here to learn or grow. They were here to survive. Karen's upbeat attitude seemed out of place, considering the environment the new hires were entering. Marcus realized that the company had become a place where people came to work, but they didn't come to thrive. They came to clock in, do their jobs, and go home. There was no excitement, no passion, and no sense of purpose. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus' resolve grew stronger. He had seen enough to understand that the company needed change, real change, not just a few adjustments here and there. The environment was broken, and if he didn't do something about it, it would continue to spiral out of control. He spent his days learning about his employees, their hopes, their dreams, and their frustrations. The more he interacted with them, the more he realized how much they needed leadership that genuinely cared about their well-being. They needed to feel valued, appreciated, and supported. It was clear to Marcus now that this was no longer just about business. It was about people, about doing right by the employees who had helped make Hale Real Estate what it was. But Marcus also knew that to fix the company, he would have to confront some harsh truths. And that meant making some difficult decisions. As he sat at his desk late one night, alone in the empty office, he knew that the next step in his mission would be the hardest yet. Days passed, and Marcus continued his undercover work, blending in seamlessly with the employees of Hale Real Estate. Each day brought new revelations, new frustrations, and deeper insight into the dysfunction that had taken hold of the company. The more he observed, the more his concerns grew. What had once been a company driven by a shared sense of purpose and vision had transformed into a place where employees were treated like expendable commodities. Morale was low, trust was shattered, and the once promising culture seemed like a distant memory. One afternoon, Marcus overheard a conversation that shook him to his core. He had been working at his desk, pretending to focus on a routine task, when he heard voices nearby. Two employees were talking in hushed tones, unaware that Marcus was listening. The first employee, a man named James, was a middle-aged worker who had been with the company for over a decade. He was a quiet, reserved man, known for his dedication to his job. The other employee, Anna, was a young woman who had been with the company for only a few months. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," James said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "They keep piling more work on us, and for what? We're not even getting the recognition we deserve. The managers don't care about us, they just want to hit their targets and move on." Anna nodded in agreement. "It's like we're invisible. I thought this job would be different. When I first joined, I had high hopes. But now, I'm just another person in the office, doing the work without any real purpose. It's all about the bottom line." James let out a bitter laugh. "You're not wrong. You know, I've been here for over 10 years, and I've never once been given a promotion. I've worked harder than most, stayed late, taken on extra projects, but I've never been recognized. I've seen people get promoted for doing half the work I do, just because they're part of the in crowd. It's all about who you know, not what you do." Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of their words. He knew the company had its flaws, but hearing it from his employees, people who had dedicated years of their lives to Hale Real Estate, made it all the more real. He had always prided himself on fostering a workplace where hard work was rewarded and where every employee had a chance to grow and succeed. But now, it was clear that the culture had become something entirely different. People were demotivated, disillusioned, and felt like their efforts were in vain. Later that day, Marcus had a conversation with another employee, a woman named Linda, who had been with the company for 5 years. She was one of the few employees who seemed somewhat optimistic, but even she had begun to lose faith in the company's leadership. "I don't know, Marcus," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "I used to love coming to work. I felt like I was part of something meaningful. But lately, it just feels like we're all just cogs in a machine. The company has lost its soul. We're constantly being asked to do more with less, and when we do succeed, no one notices. It's hard to stay motivated when you feel like your efforts don't matter." Marcus listened quietly, taking in her words. It was heartbreaking to hear, but it also solidified his growing belief that something needed to change. The company's success had been built on the hard work of its employees, but now it seemed as if the very people who had made that success possible were being ignored, taken for granted, and pushed aside. That evening, as Marcus sat in his small office, staring at the paperwork on his desk, he felt a growing sense of urgency. He knew he couldn't ignore the reality of the situation any longer. His employees were suffering, and he was partly responsible. It wasn't just about the business anymore, it was about the people who made the business run. He had been so focused on the company's growth, the financials, and the bottom line, that he had overlooked the most important aspect of all: his employees. As he sat there, reflecting on everything he had learned, Marcus' mind kept going back to one conversation in particular. It had happened earlier that day when he had overheard a manager, Todd, talking to one of his subordinates. Todd was one of the senior managers at Hale Real Estate, and Marcus had always admired his ability to close deals and keep things running smoothly. But that day, as Marcus listened in on their conversation, he realized how out of touch Todd had become with the needs of the staff. "I don't know why they're complaining," Todd said to the employee, a man named Mike. "We're hitting our numbers, aren't we? Who cares if people are unhappy? They're getting paid, and that's all that matters. Mike, the employee, hesitated for a moment. But Todd, we're pushing people too hard. They're working overtime, dealing with unrealistic expectations, and they're burned out. If we don't address it, we're going to lose a lot of good people. Todd scoffed. People always complain. You can't please everyone. Just focus on the results. Marcus was stunned by Todd's words. It was as if Todd had completely lost sight of the bigger picture. It wasn't just about hitting numbers, it was about taking care of the people who made those numbers possible. And if those people were unhappy, burned out, and feeling unappreciated, then the entire company was at risk. That night, as Marcus lay in bed, his mind raced with the knowledge he had gathered. The situation at Hale Real Estate had reached a breaking point. He had to act, and he had to act fast. But what would he do? How could he fix the damage that had been done? The thought of firing people weighed heavily on him. It felt like the last thing he wanted to do, but he knew that sometimes, tough decisions had to be made for the greater good. Marcus made up his mind. He would confront the leadership team, starting with Todd. He would expose the problems within the company, the way employees were being treated, and the lack of support that had caused morale to plummet. It would be uncomfortable, but it was necessary. The company had to be held accountable for the way it had been treating its employees. And he, as CEO, had to lead the charge for change. The next morning, Marcus walked into the office with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that things were about to change, but he also knew that the road ahead would be difficult. It was time to take action. The company could no longer continue down the path it was on. The employees deserved better, and it was up to Marcus to make sure they got it. The morning after Marcus had made his decision, the atmosphere in the office felt different. It was subtle at first, but the energy in the air was charged with anticipation. It wasn't just another regular day at Hale Real Estate. Something was about to happen, something big. Marcus could feel it. He had carefully planned every detail, but now that the moment was here, he felt a mixture of nerves and determination. The decision to reveal himself, to expose the truth, was not one he took lightly. He knew this would change everything: relationships with colleagues, how people viewed him, and how the entire company would operate moving forward. There was no turning back. Marcus had arranged for an all-staff meeting, which was highly unusual. Usually, the CEO only addressed the entire office during quarterly meetings or after major announcements, but today was different. He had asked for the meeting without giving any specific details. The employees weren't sure what to expect, and that made the entire building feel like a pressure cooker, waiting to explode. As the clock ticked closer to the scheduled time, Marcus could see the unease on the faces of his employees. People glanced nervously at each other, wondering if there was some kind of crisis or major shake-up coming. At precisely 10 a.m., the meeting began. The conference room was packed, everyone squeezed into every available chair, some standing by the door. The employees, who usually kept to their own desks, now looked at each other with silent curiosity. No one knew what to expect. As the room settled, Marcus stood in front of everyone. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing flashy, but he couldn't help feeling the weight of the room on his shoulders. He wasn't just a CEO in this moment, he was a man on the brink of revealing a truth that would change everything. He cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me on such short notice. I know this may seem unusual, but I wanted to take this opportunity to share something with all of you. Something important." The room was silent. Not a single person moved or made a sound. They all waited for him to continue, their eyes fixed on him. Marcus could feel the tension building. This was the moment of truth. "Some of you may have noticed that I haven't been around much lately," he said, pausing for effect. "I've been taking a closer look at things within this company. I've been listening to your concerns, watching how you work, and getting a sense of the environment here at Hale Real Estate. He took a deep breath and paused again, gathering his thoughts. He knew this wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. He had to make them understand the purpose behind everything he had done. Marcus glanced around the room, looking at the faces of the employees he had spent so much time with over the past few weeks. He recognized some faces from meetings and emails, but others were just ordinary workers, people who made the company run on a daily basis. People he had failed to notice for far too long. I've learned a lot in the past few weeks, Marcus continued. And what I've learned is something that needs to change. The truth is, our company culture has become toxic. We've built a place where the focus has shifted from collaboration and support to deadlines and numbers. We've allowed people to become just another cog in the machine. And that's on me. A murmur rippled through the room, the employees exchanging confused and uncertain glances. Marcus could feel the skepticism in the air. They were unsure what to make of his words. But he had to be honest. He had to tell them everything. I've spent the last few weeks here as one of you, Marcus continued. I've worked alongside you, listened to your frustrations, and seen what it's really like to be in your shoes. And what I found wasn't easy to hear. Some of you have been overworked, others have been ignored or overlooked, and many of you have been treated as if you're replaceable. I've seen it firsthand. And I can't pretend like everything's fine anymore. I won't stand by and let this continue. There was a quiet stillness in the room. For the first time, Marcus noticed that some of the employees were looking at him with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. They had always known him as the powerful CEO who called the shots, but now they were seeing him in a completely different light. He wasn't just a figurehead anymore. He was one of them. Some of you may be wondering why I'm telling you all this, Marcus went on. Why I'm standing here and sharing all of this with you. The answer is simple. I am going to take action. I am not going to sit by and allow this company to continue down the path it's been heading. I am going to make things right. And I'm going to start by making some very difficult decisions. The room was tense. People shifted in their seats, unsure of what was coming next. Marcus could see the fear in their eyes. They didn't know whether to trust him or to be afraid of what he might do. But he knew he had to do this. It was the only way forward. I have already begun making some changes, he continued. I've spoken with the leadership team, and I've already started to make adjustments to our management structure. But that's not enough. There are people in this company who have contributed to the toxic culture we've been living with. People who have abused their power and mistreated others. And those people need to be held accountable. A few gasps filled the room. Some employees looked at each other nervously, while others seemed to brace themselves for the inevitable. They all knew what Marcus was about to do. I am going to start by letting go of some of the individuals who have created this environment, Marcus said, his voice firm. I will no longer tolerate behavior that undermines the values this company was built on. We are going to rebuild. We are going to put people first. And we are going to make sure that every employee, no matter their role, feels valued, respected, and heard. For a moment, there was complete silence. The weight of Marcus' words hung heavily in the air, and the employees seemed to be processing what they had just heard. Some were relieved, others shocked, and a few were uncertain of what the future would look like. But no one could deny that change was coming. Marcus finished by looking around the room, meeting the eyes of his employees. This is just the beginning. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but I believe we can turn this company around. Together. And I'm committed to making that happen. I hope you'll join me. With that, the meeting ended. The employees slowly filed out of the room, some still processing the news, while others whispered quietly among themselves. Marcus stayed behind for a moment, his mind racing. He had just made one of the toughest decisions of his career. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was the only path forward if he wanted to save Hale Real Estate. In this part, Marcus reveals himself as the CEO and shares the truth with his employees. He acknowledges the toxic culture within the company and promises to take action. His decision to fire those responsible for the negative environment creates tension and uncertainty among the employees, setting the stage for the difficult decisions that will follow. The audience is left on edge, wondering how the company will respond to these bold moves. The day after Marcus's shocking reveal, the atmosphere at Hale Real Estate felt like it was holding its breath. Employees were still processing what had happened in the meeting, and the once bustling office was now quiet, almost eerily so. The weight of the CEO's words hung in the air like a thick fog, and no one knew for sure what the future would bring. Would the company truly change? Or was this just a momentary decision that would fade into the next quarterly report? Marcus spent that morning behind closed doors, reviewing the lists of employees who would be impacted by his decision. The process was painful. There were people he had once worked alongside, people he had trusted to help build Hale Real Estate into what it was today. But as he read through the reports, he knew that these actions, though harsh, were necessary to protect the future of the company. The toxic culture could not continue, and the leadership who had allowed it to thrive needed to be held accountable. At noon, Marcus called for another all-staff meeting, but this time, the energy was different. The room was filled with uncertainty and a sense of anxious anticipation. Some employees came in with their heads held high, hoping for change, while others shuffled in, unsure of how their future might look after the day's events. The tension was thick, but Marcus knew that it was a necessary step in rebuilding the company. As the room settled, Marcus stepped up to the podium, his face set with determination. His team was looking to him for guidance, and it was time to lead. He took a deep breath, gathering the strength to speak. "Yesterday was a tough day for all of us," Marcus began. "But it was just the beginning. We've made some very difficult decisions, and today I want to explain what comes next. The actions I've taken are not personal, they are about creating a company where everyone feels valued, where hard work is recognized, and where respect for each other is non-negotiable. For too long, we've allowed certain behaviors to persist. We've allowed a culture of fear, disrespect, and favoritism to take root. And that ends today." The room was silent, the weight of Marcus's words sinking in. Employees exchanged nervous glances, some still unsure about the future. But Marcus knew that he had to keep pushing forward. "I know some of you are wondering what this means for the company moving forward. Let me be clear, this is just the beginning of our journey. We will rebuild. We will restore the values that this company was founded on. We will put people first, and we will make sure that every single employee feels valued and heard. I am committed to making this company a place where you can thrive, where you can grow, and where you can be proud to come to work every day." There was a pause as Marcus's words hung in the air. The employees were absorbing what he had said, and for the first time in a long time, they seemed to believe that things could truly change. The seed of hope was planted, but Marcus knew it would take time for that hope to grow into something real. "Now, let's talk about what comes next," Marcus continued. "We have already begun restructuring the leadership team. Those who have been responsible for perpetuating the toxic culture will no longer be a part of Hale Real Estate. This will not be easy, but it's necessary. I will be working closely with each department to identify areas that need improvement and to ensure that we are putting the right people in the right positions." The employees listened intently, some nodding in agreement while others simply watched with cautious eyes. They didn't know what would happen next, but Marcus could sense a shift. The air was lighter now, more hopeful, and it seemed that the truth had finally been acknowledged. The first step in healing had been taken. "I know that trust has been broken," Marcus said, his voice softening. "And I want you to know that I am committed to earning that trust back. I will be transparent with all of you. I will keep you informed about the changes we're making, and I will be open to feedback. This isn't about top-down leadership anymore. This is about us working together to create a company we can all be proud of. We are in this together. For the first time in a long while, the employees seemed to exhale collectively. There was still uncertainty, of course, but there was also a sense of relief. The burden of silence and unspoken grievances had been lifted, and in its place was the possibility of something better. Marcus didn't stop there. He outlined the steps that would be taken to begin rebuilding the company's culture. He announced the implementation of new employee training programs focused on respect, diversity, and leadership development. He also promised that regular town hall meetings would be held to ensure open communication between the leadership team and employees. It was clear that Marcus was committed to transparency, and the employees seemed to respond positively to this. Let's talk about accountability, Marcus continued. We will be implementing a new performance review system. This system will be designed to give everyone a fair shot at advancement. It won't be about who you know or how long you've been here. It will be about your contributions, your work ethic, and your commitment to the company's values. Everyone deserves a fair chance to succeed, and we will make sure that happens. As Marcus finished speaking, he looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his employees. There was no going back now. The hard part had just begun, but for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt a sense of optimism. The company could be saved. It would take work, dedication, and patience, but it was possible. After the meeting, Marcus spent the rest of the day meeting with department heads and managers to discuss the next steps. There was still a lot to be done, but the foundation for change had been laid. He knew that it would take time to rebuild the trust that had been broken, but he was ready for the challenge. He was determined to restore the company's culture and make Hale Real Estate a place where everyone could thrive. The road ahead would be difficult, but Marcus was no longer afraid. The hardest decisions had already been made. Now it was time to show his employees that he meant what he said, that he was committed to making things better. He would work tirelessly to create a culture of respect, integrity, and fairness. As Marcus sat in his office that evening, reflecting on the day's events, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The company he had worked so hard to build had been given a second chance. And with that chance came the possibility of something even greater, a place where people didn't just work to survive but worked to succeed together. The journey was far from over, but Marcus knew one thing for certain: change was coming, and he was ready to lead the way.